Hello, everyone, and good morning. I am Jesse. I'm with Orthogonal Research Education Lab, JoPro, and UC San Diego, and looking forward to talking today about navigation for research and innovation. I mentioned management and leadership, but I decided to go with the concept of navigation because this talk and what we're going to be interested in today is not just about tools or tips on managing projects or leading innovation at a product level. I wanted to talk about a bit more of the broader context and the arenas that research and innovation happens in, how things um, change as they grow, and how we move to those spaces. So, our agenda very quickly is going to be a little bit of background and intro, and then diving deeply into basically a core set of themes and ideas. And these are all very high level. Um, it's more conceptual and more strategic advice. It's not going to be how to track a project. And I think that's nice to be able to do that because we don't often get spaces to have discussions around that. So I appreciate that. And then we'll close with the going forward. We may have a workshop at another event and some other developments ahead if you're interested in that. But for now, general background. Bradley is not here today on this. He's doing other things, and but definite acknowledgement to Bradley, Dr. Bradley Alicea, and his open project management coursework with the iSchool at University of Illinois, and many other things that he's done over the years, partly including Orthogonal Research Education Lab, which I'm a part of and have been there for a few years too. We have a lab-wide banner of ideas around like education and pedagogy and mentoring and how we develop idea spaces. And this is part of that. We also have a Google Summer Code / open source summer cohort with many discussions. And we've had particular Friday meetings where we've had sort of these open source projects and what's it like to have a career as either a developer or working on startup stuff or just being someone in these spaces trying to move projects forward, often aims in these cases at like early career researchers or undergrads and people like that, but really looking at very many different concepts, some of which we'll discuss later. In JoPro also, it's a group that I'm working on that's sort of a research project incubator and also hopefully vocation-ish incubation mentoring. And then I have particularly a pretty varied set of experiences in startups, many of them research oriented or technology oriented. I've been a director of strategic initiatives and partnerships. I'm based in Boston. I haven't really done much in the Bay Area, the other big space, but I'm learning increasingly after a few years in Boston, kind of how that space works. And um, so just to give a little context of I'm a master's student. I should say this a master's student at UC San Diego, but I have a lot of other experiences, both in industry and academia and in between, let's say. So, um, for some of the just a quick look at the agenda and our themes, we're going to look at organization kinds and the risks they take. Um, Demo or die as a very sort of core idea in how we're developing our more it's almost more of an internal disposition as opposed to making a product and how to talk about it. And then capturing ideas. These are very broad, massive, I would say, spaces of doing research management or leading innovation, however you want to call it. So a very high level glance at all of these different spaces, and then we'll look a little bit at specifically at the arenas you're doing the work in, like academia, startups, and industry. And again, very high level, but things sort of like things to be keeping in mind as we're either working in these spaces or working adjacent to them, or maybe you're dealing with someone in who has mostly worked in industry but wants to work on this startup, or someone who has just leaving academia, etc. So this is sort of um, an attempt to put all the cards on the table, and certainly not all the cards, but at least a few bigger ones to discuss. So the first one is organization kinds and the risks taken. I really have been in love with the framework of mountains, monasteries, and metropolis, which I'm completely taking from David Krakauer, who is the president of the Santa Fe Institute. And I think it's such an important thing to keep in mind, like wherever it is you're doing, and what you're leading people through, because depending on where they are, it will affect what you can do. So mountains, monasteries, and metropolis, what does it really mean? Mountains are sort of the, if you will, there's a little bit of an overlay, which I'm kind of giving a nudge to. I think his name was Garfunkel, Michael, the host on this transcript below. I think it's Michael Garfunkel. But he kind of did his allusion to like first person, second person, third person a little bit, and a little phenomenological stuff. But mountains, excuse me for my delay, but mountains are an allusion to introspective first person, if you will. It's you and your ideas. You are wrestling with the inspiration or the muse. You're coming up with this thing on your own, and have to kind of deal with the internal working of it, and it's maybe a lonely process, and something that you have to do sometimes you have to do some of it by yourself specifically. Monasteries, on the other hand, are these sort of controlled environments where ideas are explored, maybe with a positive community who's aware of what you're doing and sympathetic to your, personal, perhaps unrefined, perhaps not marketable thoughts. So they're offering you a space to talk about your stuff, but they're going to challenge you too. And then Metropolis is sort of the big bad world, the city, the marketplace of ideas, competing views, people who disagree, people who want to destroy your idea, perhaps. So much more conflict, but much more reach in the Metropolis. And it's such a nice framework to think about both like the broad stage of development of an idea, or just the multiple dimensions of interacting with ideas, and both organizations, if you will, perhaps representing these different archetypes, and how it changes to both go through them and also offer leadership in them. If you're leading someone to navigating a metropolis environment, your advice for how to survive and how to sort of get value from that situation or help someone explore that situation will be very different than a mountain, and the podcast that I link below is really, really wonderful. I strongly recommend it. I actually came across it in the year it was made, and I didn't have any real, I was like, oh, okay, that's nice, complexity science. But now it's like, like I think about this all the time, like how do we navigate this landscape of the 21st century, and so on. And just as implied, but just to state it, like, the risk type that an organization can take in these different sort of archetype spaces affects quite a bit. Like David Krakauer of the Santa Fe Institute says, oh, this is kind of like a monastery. And for those who don't know, it's a somewhat remote institute where a lot of people interested in complexity science and new takes on science come, and they don't have a whole bunch of money, but they take a lot of risks with ideas. And Krakauer has said, he's sort of like this leading people through these rites of passages to go from the mountains to the metropolis with their ideas. And so, the role of leadership there is quite interesting, depending on what kind of ideas you're pushing forward and what resources you have. Like sometimes you may be in a situation where you, in a very big money bureaucratic sense, you cannot risk much in terms of the way of ideas. You have to be very limited in your scope of what you can pursue and know that it's going to work, because you have to take a huge investment with the money to do it, to get the data, get the hardware, to supply the manpower, person power, researchers to do the work. And that's understanding where you are in all these spectrums is critical, and being able to communicate about them to the people in that space and manage the expectations is a lot of essentially what this talk is about. And just welcoming conversations about that, and sort of it's sort of an art, essentially a performance art of having a vision and leading people through it, and leading yourself through it. And what does that look like? So next concept, very broadly, is demo or die and beyond. So many of us are familiar with demo or die, particularly perhaps in a startup or industry-like sense. And the basic premise of demo or die is like you have to be ready to talk about your project and your idea and why it should be funded. Somebody comes in, random person stops by the lab, stops by the office. Hey, big money investor is here. They're really curious about us. Who can talk about it? We need someone to talk about it. Maybe someone's even on call, so you're prepared with your pitch, ready to go, ready to say, hey, here's what's going on. Very much on demand, perhaps impromptu, perhaps unexpected, perhaps with a lot on the line, which can be very high pressure, but not without its importance. There's a certain, I would say, best practice of knowing, okay, who's going to speak about stuff, and if you're caught off guard, can you defer to either a pre-existing material or someone else who can handle it? Because those are key opportunities in developing either an idea or an opportunity or a collaboration. And some things, sometimes lightning only strikes once or twice, as certain songs go, but also at least being aware that there's such an opportunity is vital. Even if you can't make anything happen or you've totally screwed up your pitch, being aware that it happened and that you can create other opportunities is important. Now, beyond demo or die is something that actually we've talked about in Orthogonal Lab for a long time, and it goes back several years. One of our sort of discussions around going beyond demo or die is like, demo or die is great, but like if you're bringing an undergraduate student or an early career researcher, particularly in interdisciplinary spaces, particularly someone who's new to a particular culture or environment or idea space, like you probably want to shield them from that pressure as much as possible. You didn't want to throw someone in and kind of destroy their potential development with this pressure, like, oh, you gotta have this ready to go, and you better not take risks as you're ready. You gotta know you better say exactly what we need you to say, and know it and memorize it. Like that's a very particular pressure, which may be required in certain situations, but is somewhat problematic, or at least inhibitory to other kinds of cultivation. So we talk about beyond demo or die as sort of how do you, outside of those moments and the very real need for that stuff in a sustenance-oriented way, you have to survive, yes, but how do you create communication openness or culture of development? How do you allow opportunities for people to go through growth and understand their voice and master concepts? How do you provide these opportunities? Like that's critical, to actually developing people, especially in a mentoring role, especially in perhaps dealing with early career researchers or dealing with and any new thing, if you're really truly innovating things and learning new ways to do stuff, you have to be very careful about that. Um, which we'll go into a bit more later too. And then I just put this last bit in here because it's sort of a personal interest for me. How do we situate ourselves in history and context? Um, Obviously, when you're writing an NIH grant, you have to be very particularly tailored about what it is you want to do. When you're dealing with a heavy bureaucracy and here's the grant, here's what you say, it's very, you're not trying to do that, and that relates a little bit to the previous remark about mountains, monasteries, and metropolis. Like your ability to convey a broader perspective of what's going on is dependent on what the situation can afford. Which is quite interesting because there is also new kinds of funding and grants and fellowships that are emerging that are sort of more and more open to things too. So it's sort of like, what are you targeting for your funding? What are you targeting for your idea? Who wants to work with you there, and are they going to be open to bigger pictures, perhaps? So we'll move on now to capturing and developing ideas. This is a major pitfall, if you will, or just it can be a major part of stress. Like I start with the tool zoo and its elusive quarry. We've had many tools. What's your favorite tool? What's your favorite app? How do we use it? Is it free? Does it have team support? Oh my God, Slack is, changing their policy. All of our messages are lost. Discord is nice, but how do I use it right? And so on and so on. And I find where I'm going with this ultimately is minimizing friction, but a bit about the Twirlybirds and bits of inspiration and insight. What that means is, like, you have this weird set of tools, maybe even pens and paper for certain people, digital tools and physical tools of storing or capturing an idea or inspiration, no less building things out. And so Twirlybirds, this old concept of sort of like these, I forget what they're actually called, the specific things, but the seedlings that fall from the trees and kind of hang in the air, very slowly rotating, and then eventually fall to the ground during, I think it's, I don't know if it's more spring or fall, actually. It shows what I know. But the point being, you have this thing floating ethereally in the air, and then you get to, do you like attach it to something? Do you write it down? Do you put it into a blog post? Do you use it to like file it away in like paper inspo? What do you do with that? And that's a very, I think, systematizing for ideas, especially if you're in the business or a group for trying to make ideas, like you want to find a way to capture that and try to have some organization around it, because it can be that which builds upon itself, or as the quote, ultimately what you want to get to is sort of the bottom quote, which is, again, I'm quoting Bradley, about is sort of momentum may be more important than progress. And what that means is progress in terms of the visible output, of what we're doing or what we're trying to build may not be, almost certainly won't be linear, but momentum and showing up every day to do the work, to think about the ideas or to collect the ideas and refine them and come back to them periodically. That seems to be where it's at, and especially in terms of like really doing innovative work, really trying to make something new or find out something new, to do something that hasn't been done before, can really require that. So again, if you're in a space where you can do that deeper kind of innovation, or it's required to do, how do you maintain the momentum? And that's why I go back again to sort of minimizing friction and barriers to participation relative to the roles that are there, right? Like as an administrator, you want to make a clear space for people to operate in and try to maintain it as well as it can be, and then sort of get out of the way, at least in terms of, you don't want to be changing, okay, here's how we do your notes, here's how we're taking your documents, oh, we're working your preprint here, no, actually we're going to use Overleaf now, sorry, actually we're not going to use LaTeX for this one. So I find trying to minimize fluctuation and change there as much as possible is like critical. So capture the ideas, play with the ideas, come back to the ideas, build the ideas, keep the momentum, and then try to understand the roles of different people involved, and if they're just passing through, try to make it as simple as possible. You don't want someone with great ideas who could come in as a consultant or a collaborator to be basically put off. And I think this has happened quite often, honestly. You're like, oh, geez, I can't interface with you guys. I had inspiration and opportunity, but then it passes. And it's like, because you don't have a space in order for them to just stop by, do the thing, and go, it's harder. And can lead to some missed opportunities. So I think our role as leading people through these spaces is really trying to be aware of how do we manage like tools, how do we manage the barriers to entry, and how do we keep our momentum going forward. And then next, looking at these different arenas, let's briefly look at academia, mentoring, versus or I'm not really sure what to say. Mentoring and its association with bureaucracy and academia, the good and the bad. One of the most profound moments in my life was just my first research experience. Someone was trying to be a mentor to me. I was not even in their department. Shout out to Dr. Yalen Kim. She basically took a big chance on me. I was not in her department at UAlbany a long time ago, and she let me come in, and we just talked on whiteboard about how do we make, what do we do with this data set? And how can we try to come up with an idea that makes this work? And she worked with me to make a preprint and spent this like summer hours just like really trying to make it great. And we got accepted, and it's like, this is such a wonderful experience of like being invited. I had never been invited to an idea space with someone who was ready to really hold me to high standards and make something happen. And I feel like that's that kind of magic of, even academia or just mentoring is something like, don't lose sight of that. How do we preserve the best of that in what we're doing, like both in the exploration of ideas, but also in some of the more practical things we talked about before about space and everything else, and managing and admin and inviting people, and when to be demo or die or when to be beyond it. The other side of the coin, of course, is the bad. And most of us probably know some form. You can say just political BS, rivalry, whatever you want. But your service and your functioning and your everything is at the service of the department's image. So you better not make anybody look bad, and you better not cross anything up, because if you do, well, we're going to carefully or not gracefully nudge you in the right direction or shut you down because you didn't step in line with the bureaucratic stuff. So it's sort of like, how do we navigate these two things, I'm not going to have any magic solutions or silver bullets right now, but just being very intentionally aware of that in the academia spaces, and what's the best we can do. I think that's a huge, either if you're a professor offering opportunities, if you're someone looking for opportunities, understanding those kind of pressures and understanding, over time, what is it like when someone invests in you, and what does that look like? I think that's a key thing when, in academia, startups, or industry too. So real academic versus like real politique. Expert writing versus academic writing. If you don't know what expert writing is, I really encourage looking into it. There's some wonderful videos on YouTube about it. I forget the gentleman's name who's sort of a big, he used to run the Chicago like writing department or something like that at Chicago University. But basically understanding that much training we've done in academia is about writing to people that we're paying to give a care about why we're writing about it. And in the real world or in other spaces, we need to justify why people should care about it. That's sort of a distilled version of it. And while understanding we've been trained a certain way and we speak to academia, and that's not the same as necessarily influencing things in the outside world or in other spaces, there are opportunities within academia and without. What are they? How do you offer them? What can the institution provide, both mentors and for projects? Like there's things it can do and things that it can't do. and obviously other things outside of industry, and um, and what are career choices? What support do you have? How do you make the most of academia? Is it about networks over coursework? I think that's a huge thing, especially as you can find really great coursework, but it's harder to find opportunities and people who want to invest in you to build things, or could share the journey with you. Like, you can find wonderful online coursework now, and academia and education is changing because of it, right? But that's where we are. And kind of thinking about it, like, if are you going to be a future professor? Like, are you going the tenure track? Are you trying to have a career in academia and teaching? Do you want to do it in academia? Do you want to do it at higher level education? Or do you want to just be someone who graduates as an alumni? Do you want to be someone who drops out and does other things? We're in an era where finishing a PhD is almost, well, I'll put it this way. There are government programs designed to encourage people to finish their computer science PhDs. We want you to finish the PhD. We won't fund you to finish the PhD because, sometimes it just goes right into industry. And how are those tensions affecting decisions? Okay. Moving along to startups. Darkness, vision, and strategy. It sounds so ominous. What I really mean is more leading others through the unknown. I'll very briefly mention this sort of dark cavern analogy. It's something that I've used. I think Bradley's used versions of it before in his own coursework, but basically it goes along the lines of, like, if a lot of times doing maybe not startup work, but super innovative things where you are trying to build something, as a leader or as a founder or as a someone trying to do it, you have to be very aware of the trust people are placing in you to navigate a space, perhaps even a space they cannot see or are unfamiliar with. It's sort of like, an anonymous dark cavern. You're going through it. There's a rope bridge somewhere. There's steps. There's a huge pit. There's traps or something like that. And I think an appropriate lens here is sort of you seeing yourself as a leader or a manager or a guide, that other people may not have the ability or the capacity to sense what's going on around them. They may not have the context for what's going on, and you may be in situations where it's impossible to educate them. It's sort of like, we have to for our safety, for our future to survive, we have to pass through this dark cavern, and I'm going to do my best to tell you, okay, left foot, right foot, left foot, and then in a meter you have to stop and turn right. Like, you have to give them very specific guidance about where to go and where to build up their courage about striving for the next movement. Because if you don't do that and you say, okay, well, let's just go this way, and they move that way, and then they run into a wall or step on something or fall off a cliff, and that's very bad, and trust can get damaged. And I think we've all, if we've been in this space long enough, we know what it's like to have a leadership failure in that way, and how disheartening it can be, and it can make people jump ship. It can make people question what's going on, and like, well, okay, I know the Jesse's being a really weird manager, so he's saying for us to do this, but like, I have to be careful, because what if we can't do that? And there's a lot of like buy-in at stake. There's a lot of trust and understanding how to designate roles accordingly. Maybe someone's really good at being support to leadership. Maybe someone just has to be told, okay, we've made the decision, now you follow in line here, because this is the best strategy for us to navigate this space. And there's plenty of other things you can draw from that, but I feel like that's sort of an important visual of what's happening at times, especially when you're doing like risky things or stuff that just haven't happened, things that aren't proven yet. So again, that's sort of a broad thing, and a specific thing is the next bullet or title: knowing your funding and your security. Who cares about what you're doing, or cares about you, and what do you owe them? That's obviously always in mind for investors and everything else, but sort of like being able to see who cares and why, let's say, is critical. Pivoting is necessary. Many people write about pivoting and talk about how many times they've had to pivot to be successful in a startup or their venture. I'm not really going to go into that, but I'll just say yes, understanding, in a navigational sense, it's the cost. It's a trade-off between, do you want to be successful in a market? Do you want to be successful in an idea space? What's going to affect the nature of your pivoting, let's say. And then, as I kind of elaborated a lot in the above thing, guiding others through changes as well as you can, realizing it's not going to be perfect, and other people's fitness and an understanding of the imperfection of that will be critical. Like being able to understand what someone's ability to cope with those changes is a key factor in all of this, both in terms of inviting them as on the team or inviting them leadership, but also growing or cultivating them as a collaborator or contributor or researcher or employee or whatever it is that they are. And then many hats across many teams. This is a huge topic that I will just, again, allude to, but sort of the depending on your role, either as a leader or often in many startup spaces, simply as a person there, learning how to discuss across teams, how to relate to the marketing department, or if the marketing department is you or someone else who's hired on a part-time, like understanding what that is. Just getting sort of the fluency and understanding the priorities across teams. What is this team's really trying to do? What is this team or people in it, how are they trained to achieve their goal? And I think the more you develop this cumulative context of what the organization is doing, almost as a sort of, emergent entity that has many subcomponents, but then a broader thing that's more than just the components. What is going on, and how do you communicate, and can you take it? If in an ideal situation, you can say, hey, you're from a different team, I don't really know what's going on, can I learn from that? Or as a leader, seeing people who would really be, how do you facilitate the understanding when it's not there? Things like that. I'm a little bit behind schedule already, so I'll just quickly go through this too. Industry, demonstrating value, but to whom? Some core topics here are workplace communications and defense. I say defensive driving, but more that was something when I was getting my license and permit a while ago. I don't know if it's still the same now, but it's sort of, as you're moving through these spaces, understanding how to defend or represent or advocate for yourself. How do you have the receipts, if you will, or just knowing whose justification you're doing something for or by, and being able to say, okay, because this person or my boss or this said this is why I did this, and here's why. Very much kind of lawyering a bit, but understanding like that's in a defensive sense. Not saying we have to be defensive or combative or anything like that, but more like understanding how to both advocate for yourself and justify actions, I think is critical in industry, because depending on your culture, which can be super open or super not open, being able to have awareness of that is I would say, critical. Furthermore, C-suite alignment. If you're in the C-suite and you're the decision maker, then I would say, okay, have as much clarity around these topics as possible for other people, and make your communications as well as they can be. But if you're not, it's super critical to understand what the decision makers are looking at. You have to find their language. You have to understand their personalities. You have to realize, okay, the management's blowing up about this because they forgot something, and it's not actually somebody's fault. It's just they're looking for someone to blame. Or management usually has a tendency to do this, but we are heading in the right direction, and we can kind of counterbalance their ways of going about it with this, which they might not be able to realize, but, you know, um, et cetera, et cetera. This sort of getting this bigger picture about strategically what's going on, and understanding that if you're not in that group, you're not going to know everything. Like you can't know everything. You're not supposed to know everything, but more growing in intentionally being aware of what happens and why, and what are the motives at place. I think that's a very important thing to think about in industry. What are your how is your ideas furthering those goals? And then kind of, the learn to earn versus offering an opportunities. Like learn to earn is the classic. Well, you should either be learning or you should be earning. Like you should be getting a lot of great experience, or you should be getting a lot of money, making bank, and so on. Yeah, I think those are valuable ways to look at it too. What are the opportunities where you are, either for your ideas or for your career? Is the situation you're in career oriented? Or as a leader in the space, are you helping people move in the direction they want to go, and can you communicate clearly what they can and can't do in that space? Are you offering them professional development? Is there a budget for it? Is there a space for it? Does the management care about it? Can you advocate or create that otherwise? Those are the kind of things I think about in industry. Like, how do you leverage what industry can do, and what can you do adjacent to it or outside of it, just like all the other different arenas. So wrapping up here, basically, a few final thoughts. This came up literally earlier today before I recorded this in another group meeting. Riding the waves. So much of navigation is, especially in a broader sense or in a communication sense, in a where are things going sense, it's sort of, I think we're all probably familiar with the idea of summers or winters of AI, and even like micro concepts within them, or AI or other fields of study we might be interested in, etc. I went to a conference some years ago. I was like, oh yeah, deep learning will save us, and then deep learning won't save us, and now it's, AI means this, and now it's LLMs they've hit the ceiling, where they're done. It's agental AI, and so on. And earlier this year, I was at an event that was saying, oh, well, LLMs, and everybody was talking about, how to apply LLMs to their clinical AI, and this, and having this bot, and so on and so forth. And it's sort of like, you have to be aware of that stuff, but also some of it's just about setting directions or going into a novel destination. How much of that is what you want to do as a person? How much of that is dependent on the organization you're in? And how much do you want to really try to push that forward with your own ideas, with others' ideas? That's I think in so many terms, it's sort of this, you're riding the wave of the expert communication and what's popular and what's going to get funding, what's going to be a patent, what's going to be things people are looking for, what's going to be accepted as a publication. And it's this constant battle between that and what externally is viable and what internally you can produce and help others and build out. So going forward, a few things ahead. We may have an actual workshop that's a little bit more pragmatic, hands-on, at New York Celebration of Women in Computing, which is an event that I've been at for a long time. I'm a co-chair at the event, but I might be submitting that through Orthogonal Research Education Lab, as we've done a lot in this space. So check that out. Check out NICWIC if you want to support that group. It's a wonderful community for New York Celebration of Women in Computing, but basically inclusivity and diversity in computational fields or technical fields, STEM. Wonderful people there. You can join our lab. We have some openings, we have opportunities, we have projects around this, both like at doing some things, both active inference related perhaps. We have cognition futures, we have society, ethics, technology, and we have maybe not a working group, but I'm kind of developing one to talk specifically about this stuff, or like doing research differently, managing through that. And then I'm also making a Substack about this topic, tentatively titled for now, From Here to There, Mentoring a Strategy for Innovators. So again, this was super quick. Actually, it was quite long, but it felt so fast to me because these topics are so in depth, and I look forward to talking more about them in the future. Please reach out to me on Discord or many other platforms. You can just you can find me on the internet. Yeah, but it was great to talk and stay in touch, and we're happy to answer any questions after this. Thank you, and have a good one.